What are 3 mistakes screenwriters make with loglines?
Well, the 3 that I tend to see are stopping at the setup. So describing just the initial situation and not really giving us any indication of what happens in the meat of the movie, if that makes sense. Often when we come at stories, we come with an interesting what if, and that's a great, entry point into a story, but then you sort of have to develop that continuation of the conflict, right? Like, what's the real problem that they're trying to solve? In a logline, if you just give me the setup, I don't know if you've thought that through. If you've come up with the story part of your screenplay, I know that you've come up with a situation, but not necessarily a story. So that's the first mistake that I see people make with loglines. The second one is not having an act 2, which is a little bit different than the first one. If you are conveying to me what's happening in your movie, but it's something sort of transitory or that can be done in one scene or 1 minute, then that raises a little bit of a red flag, because then it feels like maybe you don't have enough to sustain an entire movie. And then the third mistake that I see a lot is packing too much detail into your logline. So, usually this happens after somebody has written the script, and so they know so much about the story and they've fallen in love with everything that they've written that then they try to distill all of that down into one sentence, and it's really hard because they have all these details that they know and all these, subplots and supporting characters and character arcs and all this stuff. And so they'll try to jam all of that into one sentence, and then that just makes it confusing. And we want that logline to ultimately to just really convey a solid sense of what that movie is that we'll be watching if we sit down in the theater, right? So we need to know, like, what's that main conflict, that big conflict that we're going to be tracking over the course of that movie, and have a sense of the nature of the action that we're watching on screen. So what are the sort of broad strokes things that character is doing in pursuit of that story goal? That's really what you're trying to get into the logline. And like I always say, you can start with those sort of 4 foundational elements: your protagonist, the story goal, the antagonist or main force of opposition, and the stakes. Start there, write 1 sentence with those elements, and that should give you a really good start for your logline. You may need to add a few details, but that way you're starting with a solid foundation, and then you can add details as necessary rather than, starting by putting everything you know about the story into a sentence and then trying to pull things out.
So going back to the logline example that we did, and I don't know whether this video will come out before the other one.
Oh, yeah.
So people might be confused by what I'm referring to, but the logline that I gave you was definitely confusing and there was too much in it. So we cleaned it up and we found out that it wasn't just about the writing group, it was more about her finding love.
Yeah.
So that was getting to the meat of it.
Yeah, because I think if you were going to write that script, it sounded like what the story that you wanted to tell was really about this mismatched romance, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what we want to convey in the logline, because then when I read the script or I watch the movie, that's the movie that I'm getting. You're not telling me that Dangerous Minds story, Right. You're telling me the English Patient or whatever. And so those are, both movies that work, but I want to know which one I'm getting before I pick up that script or before I go see that movie. So making sure that you convey a true sense of the story that you want to tell in that logline, that's what we're looking for.
What situation will a screenwriter use loglines? When will this come up?
Well, I think there are a few different situations. In the classes that I teach, we usually start with loglines as sort of the first iteration of your story. So just like you and I were talking about trying to figure out what's the story that you actually want to write, we use loglines as a way to kind of figure that out. Like, what is this story that you're trying to tell? In that case, I think that, we put much more of the focus on getting those essentials of the story into the logline so that it's we can tell if that foundation is solid before we start developing the story further. But you might also use a logline in a query letter or to pitch to somebody in person, that elevator pitch of your story. So if you're using that version of a logline, you're probably going to think a little bit more carefully about the language that you use, because it's not just for internal use anymore. You're actually presenting this as, this is the product essentially that I'm trying to pitch you. So you'll probably be a little bit more careful about word choice and a little bit more conscious of getting really conveying the tone of the story and sort of that feel of the movie, if you can, through the word choice and through just the language and the way you're describing the situation.
Sorry, can you explain foundation? I know that's jumping a little bit off topic, but
no, when I talk about the foundation, that's just me referring to kind of those essential building blocks of your story. So the protagonist, the story goal, the antagonist or opposition, and the stakes. Like those are the things that every story needs. You kind of have to have those elements, and so that's where I start if I'm helping someone figure out what story they're telling or figure out what's not working about their story. You just have to start with the foundation layer and then work your way up, right? So make sure that that's solid, and then we can talk about the other pieces that go into making your story work.
So what if someone says, well, I don't have a really strong antagonist, but I have a great sidekick character? Is it because there's no opposition? There's nothing that this hero needs to overcome? Yeah,
that could be. That would be my first instinct, is if someone says they're writing a story that doesn't have an antagonist, it wouldn't be necessarily a deal breaker, but I would want to know, where is that conflict coming from, right? Because if you are telling a story where sort of nothing goes wrong, it's probably going to be either a pretty short story or we're just going to get bored pretty quickly. Right. So I would want to know, I would question, where is that conflict coming from? If it's not a sort of, traditional, like direct conflict that we can see between two people or a person in a group or, that type of thing, then what is making this journey for your protagonist so difficult or so interesting,